Hi, it's Ken Boon. Today is our last video on GE2025, and we are going to be talking about what happened to the Progress Singapore Party in West Coast-Jurong West GRC. Before I go into that, I want to thank all of you for the tremendous support over the past few months. When I started this in late January, all I wanted to do was to share my thoughts on things that mattered to Singapore. Then the elections happened, and I started to talk on politics. Things started to snowball from there, and today we have a vibrant community that all of us should be really proud of. Now that the elections are over, I hope that we can continue to drive civil discourse, not just in politics, but also in current affairs and issues that concerns us as Singaporeans. That said, let's dive into today's topic. So on 3rd of May, I remember watching the election results live on that Saturday night.
Counts. Let's take a look at West Coast-Jurong West GRC, anchored by Minister Desmond Lee, the PAP team getting 61% of the sample count against the PSP's 39%. The PSP's team has Dr. Tan Cheng Bock as the anchor and other A-listers from PSP, including Leong Man Wai and Hazel Phua. This is also probably Tan Cheng Bock's final outing.
I was just as shocked as the guy announcing the results. I think he couldn't believe how A-listers from PSP only managed to get less than 40% of the votes. Yeah, neither could I. I knew that sample counts are generally close to the final results, despite only picking 100 ballots for the sample, and that was true for West Coast-Jurong West. When the dust settled, the final score was 60.01% for the PAP and 39.99% for the PSP. My first reaction was voter mix. A quick recap of the analysis that I did on the impact of the boundary changes on West Coast-Jurong West. The EBRC had recommended moving estates from Jurong West and Taman Jurong into this constituency. In addition, eastern parts of the former West Coast in Harbourfront and Sentosa were moved to Radin Mas, leaving behind around 110,000 existing voters. So in all, there were around 159,000 voters. To quantify the potential boundary impact, I applied the GE 2020 win rates for PAP, that is around 52% and 75% for former West Coast and Jurong GRCs respectively. All else equal, that would have put the PAP at a 58% starting point for GE 2025. And you know what's interesting? This number is really close to the actual win rate of 60% in GE 2025, suggesting that the new Jurong voters had a material impact. As many of you know, Jurong is a PAP stronghold under its former anchor minister and now Singapore's president, Mr. Taman. It would appear that even with his departure from politics, his effects continue to be strong with the residents. With the results being so similar to the starting point, it suggested that the PSP had failed to make significant inroads with these new Jurong voters, but it also suggested that the PSP continued to have similar success canvassing the familiar West Coast residents in the last 5 years. In my original analysis, I thought that the A-list team for PSP would be sufficient to plug the gap, but it appears that a number of systemic factors played out stronger in favour of the incumbent and against the challengers. Nationwide, the PAP have very successfully sold a flight to safety theme throughout GE 2025, and this was part of the reason why there was an upswing of 4.33% for PAP's mandate, which was unusual after a change of guard of the Prime Minister. Now, if we took that starting point of 58% and factored in the general upswing for PAP, the odds will be around 62% for the PAP. So with the actual results being 60%, it suggests several things. One, the PSP had made some inroads with voters, or more likely there were other factors that came together to close the gap a little. So let's take a look at some of this. First, let's examine the PSP stance on US tariffs at its early onset.
Call by the government ministers about this tariff, in my opinion, is partly to instill fear in the voter. So the voter will be so frightened. Oh, this thing is going to happen. It's going to be serious. You better vote for the incumbent. Safe bet. So I like to say that these things must be studied carefully and by economists like Mamandwai and all these people on the real impact of this tariff on our people. Don't just make statements of this kind and scare everybody.
So that was PSP's chairman, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, seemingly downplaying the effects of tariffs on Singapore. But put yourself in Dr. Tan's shoes. In elections generally, the PAP has been very successful in identifying challenges faced by Singapore and that they are the steady hand to navigate them for Singaporeans. In 2020, there was COVID-19. In 2025, now we have the US tariffs. And in 2020, Dr. Tan's party came agonizingly close to winning a constituency. And this year, when he finally put together a good team of old guards and new candidates, this is happening all over again. So those statements, based on my view, were said out of frustration. That said, PSP's Secretary General, Mr. Leong Man Wai, came out to clarify those statements a few days later. However, I thought the damage was already done. So for those that may have seen the first press conference by Dr. Tan or read about it in the news, there's going to be a good portion of them that never catches the clarification by Mr. Leong. So I thought that this incident may have made the PSP look out of touch, especially now in hindsight, where we can see that the Singapore electorate really bought into the PAP's flight to safety narrative. Next, there were internal renewal problems at the PSP. In GE2020, they had people like Mr. Ravi Philaman and Ms. Michelle Lee who left the PSP under uncertain circumstances to form the Red Dot United. Then you had Ms. Kala Manikam and Mr. Brad Bauer who were infighting over COVID-19 views while being on the same team. So it demonstrated that the PSP did not have their house in order and may have issues attracting the right talent. In GE2025, things were trending better as there were no obvious deviants within their faction. But the PSP was not able to shake off that impression that they are an old party. So Chairman Dr. Tan Cheng Bock is 85, Sec Gen Mr. Leong Man Wai is 66, First Vice Chair Ms. Hazel Phua is 54. In GE2025, there was only one candidate below 40, and that was 37-year-old Ms. Stephanie Tan, an ex-lawyer and now current housewife. So by and large, the PSP has remained very old guard heavy, and as a voter, you do worry about what happens when they retire. And further on the issue of people, the PSP leadership made several interesting choices of association. In 2021, Dr. Tan had put his weight behind Mr. Tan Kin Lian for his presidential bid, and this had rubbed some Singaporeans the wrong way. And I'll just show you again what Mr. Tan did when asked about photos of young girls on his social media platforms.
Most of the people say it is quite light, it's quite enjoyable. That's how I build my people to be interested. There will be a few people who are still uncomfortable, but that is a very small minority. That's a very small minority. Majority actually find that to be quite okay, quite fun.
On top of that, they had also aligned themselves with Mr. Lee Hsien Yang, and for those associations, I might argue that this was some time ago, so voter memories may have faded. But this year, the PSP associated themselves with another controversial character.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Progress Singapore Party's last rally for this general election 2025. Thank you all for coming. I'll be your MC for tonight. My name is Leon.
I cannot begin to understand what political mileage can be gained from having ex-Workers' Party Mr. Leon Perera MC one of their rallies. There is literally so little upside but so much downside. Singaporeans still lean conservative, so to have Mr. Perera represent the PSP in any way or form is just not a good look for the party. Let me put it this way. I don't personally take exception to any of the characters that I mentioned, but there are a sizable number of Singaporeans that would. And the problem with associating with these controversial characters is that the conversation becomes less about the PSP and what the party stands for, but diluted with what's right or wrong about these candidates. And in an electoral system where you have 9 days to campaign, all that time wasted is a death sentence. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the PSP performance in Parliament. So Secretary General Mr. Leong Man Wai and First Vice Chair Ms. Hazel Phua spent the last 5 years showcasing their parliamentary chops. So one of the things often said about Singaporeans is that they want PAP to form the majority government, but for opposition to provide checks and balances. And for the past 5 years, those checks came mostly from the MPs from the Workers' Party and the 2 NC MPs from the PSP. When I looked at the average performance of constituencies where the Workers' Party lost in GE2025, you can see that the average performance was around 45%. In fact, the lowest percentage that they achieved was in East Coast, where they got 41%. All the results are better than the PSP. And that suggests to me that there is limited credit given to the PSP in Parliament. But perhaps this is not surprising. For every battle that Mr. Leong and Ms. Paul fights for in Parliament, there's a negative offset somewhere. For example, that West Coast couple incident where Mr. Leong received a POFMA correction because he did not do due diligence on their claims, that tantrum that he threw at then Speaker of Parliament Mr. Tan Chuan Jin, where he had apologized, and many more. And none of this are necessarily anyone's fault. After all, imagine being put into Parliament for the first time. You're going to be making some mistakes of your own, and very publicly too. Overall, this is how I saw the West Coast calculus. The boundary changes hit the PSP hard. On a national level, the PAP played a strong game in the flight to safety narrative that was a deep contrast to PSP's initial stance on US tariffs. Then there were potential damage from the association with controversial characters past and present, and renewal challenges seen within the party. And their NCMP performance appears to have limited appeal among voters. And all of those came together for that surprising, yet not that surprising outcome on hindsight. And before I end off, here's a food for thought. With the PSP having no presence in Parliament for the next 5 years, there's a very real risk of them fading away into obscurity. Renewal challenges that they faced in GE2025 will get that much more challenging. Questions should be asked on whether there's a case for consolidation among the alternative parties. And if their goal is to advance Singapore's interests, stakeholders should think not along party lines, but on where their ideologies overlap, and for them to figure out a way to work together for Singapore and Singaporeans. And with that, we've come to the very last of our GE2025 coverage, and what a journey it has been. I'm very much looking forward to our new topics and agenda in the coming weeks and months ahead. But until then, let's hear your thoughts on the PSP and the West Coast-Jurong West in the comment section. And until we meet again at the next episode of our Red Dot Perspective.